Hello, listener. You will be able to enjoy Cosmic Motion even if we're discussing a movie you have not yet seen. But as we're talking about many elements of this film, and will almost certainly spoil some aspects, if you'd rather not know anything in advance, watch the movie first, and then come back and join our ghostly discussion. Welcome to episode 18 of Cosmic Motion, an audio program where filmmakers of all kinds discuss motion pictures, good, bad, ugly, and always interesting throughout the cinematic cosmos. We're recording this on March 16th, 2025. I'm here with my petrified co-host, Colin Dixon. He's a multimedia editor and avid practicer of the dark arts.
Yeah, and we're being guided today by the rootinest vaquero north of the Rio Grande, Bill Budell, director, editor, writer, creator, Tor Johnson, Tori Spelling, Torgo the Hunchback, Fernando Torres.
Oh, I like it.
All I got.
I'll take it. This week, we're joined by filmmaker Sean Hood. He started his career as a set dresser on the original Twin Peaks television show, grew into writing films such as Halloween Resurrection, The Crow, Wicked Prayer, and Conan the Barbarian from 2011 starring Jason Momoa. He's worked with directing talents as diverse as Rennie Harlan, David Lynch, Marcus Nispel, and David Fincher. Occasionally, Sean directs short subjects like The Shy and the Naked and Melancholy Baby. He is also a co-founding member of the Filmmakers Alliance here in Los Angeles and a longtime friend of previous guest and friend of the show, Jacques Telemaque. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. And also, you are a teacher.
Yeah, I teach at USC's School of Cinematic Arts. I teach a couple of different classes there. One's a seminar just for students who are writing feature screenplays, and I also teach a big lecture course where I show movies and then lecture about them. So it ends up being like a 4-hour course, and hundreds of students take it.
Is it any kind of film? Do you go back to silence and start there and kind of go in chronological order?
Well, it's a class about film structure. So I tend to show a variety of different genres of movies, mostly movies that have come out in the last 20 years or so. The idea is that it's the first course that students who want to be screenwriters would take. So rather than reading scripts or even writing scripts, they watch movies and I break them down for them, showing them various cinematic devices and ways of analyzing movies and also all sorts of screenwriters techniques.
I want to take your course. What is like one or two films that you discuss that you like to show your students?
Well, I usually kick it off with a Hitchcock film. So I show North by Northwest or Rear Window.
Oh, man.
And then from there, I show a comedy. I usually show School of Rock. I show a family film. I usually show Finding Nemo. And then I show just a variety of different kinds of films. I show some foreign films, Separation, the Iranian film.
Yeah.
4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, which is a Romanian film that won the Palme d'Or at Cannes many years ago. Then I show some films that are a little bit more straightforward, like Mad Max Fury Road.
Oh, wow.
And usually ended up with a Lynch film, but since I have a personal connection with Lynch. I show Mulholland Drive.
Well, Lynch is somebody that I love dearly. I'm sorry that he has recently passed.
Yeah, me too. He was a really brilliant filmmaker and one of the only true surrealist filmmakers we've ever had.
Yeah, and the fact that he was able to bring surrealism to the mainstream is kind of extraordinary.
Yeah, it's really amazing that his films were as popular among a general audience as they were because they are so strange.
Exactly. He certainly introduced me to a lot of things. Where did your passion for movies begin? How did you get into this game?
Well, both my parents were musicians. And when you're a kid and your parents are musicians and they're practicing for 4 hours a day, every day, it seems like a lot of work. And so you tend to go in a different direction. And I knew I wanted to be creative. And I spent some time as a painter, but I was just always inspired by movies. And my parents were big movie buffs. So my father sort of at the B movie end and my mother at sort of the highfalutin high end.
Right.
And I ended up watching movies in the mid 80s, some of the first like big indie movies like Spike Lee's She's Gotta Have It.
Yeah.
And Jim Jarmusch films and things like that made me aware of the power of cinema. And then I started watching foreign films and other things that all the way through college, I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I went to Brown and they didn't really have a practical filmmaking department. So I got out of school and I was working for a software company at the time, and I was sitting with my father eating sushi, and complaining that I wanted to get into the film business, but I didn't know how. And a regular at the sushi bar, someone that my father had met before, overheard the conversation and said, well, why don't you quit your job and come be my intern?
Wow.
And then I quit my job, and he got me an internship with the art department at Twin Peaks.
That's incredible. And is it just by chance that you didn't wind up being Bob?
It's just by chance.
Do you know that story, Colin?
Yeah, he was a prop guy.
Yeah.
And he was crouched behind a couch as they were doing a take, and Lynch saw him. It was like, that's my killer Bob.
That's Bob. He saw him twice. He saw him then, and then apparently also he saw him later when Palmer, what's the mother's name?
I forgot.
Laura Palmer's mother bolts up from a nap, and she screams, and there's a mirror, and Lynch said, okay, we got the shot. And the camera operator said, no, we don't have it. Somebody was reflected in the mirror. And he said, who was reflected in the mirror? And he said, that actor. And he said, okay, that's a sign. He's in the show.
That's great.
Yeah. So amazing. That must have been quite a formative experience. And obviously, it's a touchstone in television, and it changed television. So you had a really unique entree. It
was fun because I was fresh out of college. I was really a little kid, and I spent my 12 hours a day just, or sometimes 14, 15 hours a day, just on Lynch's sets. So sort of inside his mind.
Wow.
For 12 months. It was great.
Did you guys shoot on Balboa and Van Nuys at that?
We did.
Because I worked at that. I worked at that warehouse. It was basically like a warehouse that they converted into a semi-studio. And I worked on a show there years later. And I printed a script one time of some of the episodes from Twin Peaks, and it had that address. And I said, holy smokes, I'm working at the place where they shot Twin Peaks.
Yeah, you did. Absolutely.
I was so happy when I found that out.
Yeah, people think it was shot in the Pacific Northwest and parts of the pilot.
The pilot, yeah.
Right. And they had all sorts of second unit shots that they would sort of throw into the episodes, but it was all in Van Nuys.
Right there in Van Nuys. Isn't that funny? The magic of Hollywood.
Exactly.
Yeah, people underestimate how difficult it is to get an entire film crew onto a biplane.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. It's funny how they transformed that area and shot it there. Well, so the films that you mentioned, were you a kid when you saw Jarmusch and Spike Lee? Was there other stuff that you saw earlier that you thought, oh, I love movies? Because I know you said your parents both loved movies and they had different tastes. Was there something that you saw particularly as a child? It doesn't have to be like a Disney movie. It could be, but just anything that inspired you and made you realize that movies were something special?
Well, I certainly, I was a kid when I was, how old was I? I think I was 11 when Star Wars came out.
Okay.
So that, of course, affected me.
Yeah.
And Raiders of the Lost Ark and those sorts of movies definitely inspired me as far as big, crowd-pleasing, gigantic...
Spielberg and Lucas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that inspired me, but it was really in the mid-'80s that I first started seeing movies that were for adults. I remember my parents had a Betamax, and they would record movies late at night, and I would find all these movies. I'd just see the titles. I'd see movies like Peter Weir films, like The Last Wave and The Year of Living Dangerously.
Sure.
I would watch those movies over and over and over again because I was so obsessed with not only the stories, but the tones of the movies.
Yeah.
And then I started watching other movies that they just had recorded, like Woody Allen's Manhattan, although, Woody Allen, you're not allowed to love Woody Allen like you could in the past.
Manhattan took on different meaning.
Yeah, it did. But other movies like Bergman movies like Fanny and Alexander were all available to me. And so it was like this secret world that that opened up for me.
Wow, you had access to a lot of great art films and foreign films when you were pretty young, so that's wonderful. And what drew you into filmmaking itself in terms of the actual doing? Was it writing first? Was it something else?
No, it was. I started working as a set dresser, and I started, and I really didn't know what part of filmmaking I wanted to be a part of. I thought at first that I might want to be a production designer because I was working in an art department, and I thought I have an art major, maybe that's my path. But the more I worked on movies, the more I became obsessed with wanting to be in the center of the storytelling process. Okay. And I thought I wanted to be a director. So I joined Filmmakers Alliance, and that was a perfect, almost like a theater troupe where everyone would work on everybody else's films.
Didn't you help start Filmmakers Alliance?
I did.
Yeah,
I did. Okay. I was among the first 8 of them, all sitting around in Jacques' apartment at the time, talking about film and talking about how we were going to make films and for as little money as possible. And that led to me going to film school. I went to USC, and it was really at USC that I realized that writing was going to be a real component to my filmmaking. Okay. And by the time I got out of USC, I sold a script to MTV and Paramount.
Oh, wow.
Called The Dorm, which took about 16 years and finally got made as a mediocre TV film.
Okay.
But that led to more screenwriting work. And it was a horror film, so I got a lot of work with Dimension Films, doing rewrites on a lot of their genre movies.
Oh, wow.
And it just sort of unfolded like that.
Incredible. And so writing became your sort of favorite aspect of filmmaking.
Absolutely. I think it was also, I always enjoy directing because I love working with actors. But, a lot of being a director is having a big extroverted personality to be able to control the set. And I found that I was more comfortable working, collaborating, but working by myself a lot of the time.
Right.
I think it comes from also being a painter and liking that sense of getting away from people and working in a room by yourself, and then taking what you've done and collaborating with them later.
Sure. Well, you have picked an interesting film for today. Do you want to tell us what it is?
Yeah, it's called The Book of Stone, and it's a Mexican film. And it's sort of supernatural horror, but it's a particular type of horror that I'm specifically interested in. And that's horror movies that evoke a sense of the weird and the eerie, which is something I want to talk about more. But it's a kind of horror filmmaking where the images and the objects on screen tend to provoke the audience's imagination so that we don't really see much of the supernatural entity that's there,
right?
But we're provoked to imagine it ourselves.
Right.
And that's often, if it works, it's a much more effective way of scaring the audience because what we can imagine is always more scary than what actually appears on screen.
100%.
Because we're sort of projecting our own fears and anxieties onto the gap left on screen when something is indicated but not actually shown.
Right. And the American side, that seems to be often associated with the producer Val Lewton.
Right.
And people like Jacques Tourneur.
Yeah, absolutely.
I loved that about this film, by the way. The kind of the evocative nature of it, the way that it drew out mood and that it used very little to do a lot.
Right. It was a real slow burn over the course of the movie. And as a result, it kept my attention. Mm-hmm. As most movies ultimately have to reveal something of the entity or the supernatural presence. Once it was revealed, it's always a little bit of a disappointment.
Right.
When you see the little kid with his white makeup and he's standing there and you realize, oh, it's just a little boy.
Right.
But before then, when all you see are these fragments, you see his feet under the curtain, you see a glimpse of him in the mirror, you see his shadow, all those pieces, again, provoke the audience to imagine what this thing could be that is haunting them.
Right. Well, The Book of Stone's original title is literally the translation, El Libro de Piedra. It's from 1969. It's 99 minutes long, and it's considered one of the great Mexican horror films of all time. Did you enjoy it, Colin?
I did. Should we drop a synopsis about it?
Please.
Okay, well, just briefly. A wealthy family headed by the muy guapo Eugenio Ruvalcaba, played by Joaquín Cordero, hires a pragmatic outsider named Julia, actress Marga Lopéz, to be the governess of their headlong and irksome daughter, Silvia. Silvia, who can't seem to shake the notion that her imaginary friend Hugo is more than a mere figment of her imagination, and who can't get along with her potential stepmother Mariana to save her own life, seems to need extra attention and a delicate approach, which Julia is all too happy to supply, considering the all too familiar horror trope of a lost daughter. Silvia leads Julia through all kinds of hijinks, claiming to be under the influence of Hugo, who is embodied by the statue of a young boy in the woods near their manor. As she earns Silvia's trust, Julia is subjected to visions and strange occurrences of her own, and learns that virtually everyone else in the house, including Mariana and the family's service people, is convinced that Hugo is indeed a real and evil entity. It becomes clear that the phenomena some in the household have written off as coincidence might just have a more arcane origin. They begin to hone closer to the roots of what might be a black magic mystery, one that threatens to undo the very ties that bond the household together, and this time, it's personal. So yeah, I kind of agree with what you guys are saying about its approach. I guess that there are different ways to distinguish horror. One of those might be, and I suppose there's no eloquent way of describing a horror movie as a pop-out and scare you horror film. But this film is not interested in surprise scares. It's absolutely interested in utilizing its environment, and as you say, Sean, sort of projecting, allowing you a vessel to project your own fears onto.
Exactly.
And that is the thing I appreciated the most about it. In fact, to your point, it is when the film starts to reveal these secrets and reveal Hugo in general that I start to kind of glaze over a little bit. That being said, there is something about the pacing of this film that rubbed me the wrong way. And I do have to acknowledge, that, as a millennial, there is this music video kind of editing that we are accustomed to, and you do have to kind of check your generational proclivities at the door, especially with a film that is several generations old. But I did just kind of see so many tropes that were popping up, and I'm not sure I can blame the film, but I felt like I knew where it was going ahead of every curve, to a point where I even said to myself out loud somewhere after the first act, I was like, well, it's surely at some point they're going to visit, a professor of the occult or something. And then,
right.
And then eventually that's what happens. So those kind of familiar tropes were grating at me a little bit.
And that's interesting to me because as a horror filmmaker, you want to do what I suggested earlier, which is provoke the audience to imagine things. But in order to do that, you have to give them things that are precisely unfamiliar, that feel that you can't quite get your head around them. And because this movie's a little older, because a lot of the tropes have been utilized so much in other movies,
right?
That sense of unfamiliarity is sort of lost.
Yeah, and that is one thing, I do try to put myself in the audience's shoes, and I'm trying to imagine a Mexican audience in the late 60s. A lot of this might have been unfamiliar territory at the time.
Right.
So I do have to credit the film in that regard. It's very possible. And now, so actually, let me ask you as this, would you categorize this as Gothic horror?
I was actually wondering the same thing myself. Maybe, some kind of Mexican Gothic could work.
Well, it certainly comes from a Gothic tradition. It evokes movies like The Innocents,
yes,
and books like Turn of the Screw by Henry James. So it definitely has that Gothic pedigree. The idea of a governess coming into a strange situation is even home. It's like Jane Eyre in some senses. So it has that pedigree, and it's also not horror in the sense of relying on shock, fear, and disgust
right.
to sort of rattle the audience. It's more of a supernatural mystery than it is a pure horror film.
And psychological thriller to a degree.
Right.
Because you're trying to figure out, at least at first, is the girl crazy? Is she sane? And this is actually happening? All the things that, yes, we're used to. But I actually found myself, and maybe I'm just gullible, I kind of just gave myself to the movie, and I felt like it approached it very well. It constructed the narrative well. It wasn't super fast, but I was fine with that. I was fine to kind of relax and get to know the characters. And also I was curious about, this is a Mexican horror film. What does that feel like? What's that look like? How do the people act? Looking at the styles from 1968, 69, on screen, and seeing the lead character's giant, I don't know what you would call that hairdo, like a beehive maybe.
Yeah, right.
that was maybe the scariest thing in the whole movie. But everybody, you know, what's also interesting, I'm part Argentinian. She's actually Argentinian, Marga Lopéz. Okay. And she moved to Mexico and had a big career in Mexican films. She's also a Nazarene, one of Luis Buñuel's films.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
One of his Mexican films. So interesting. I thought, you know, she was quite good despite the distracting hairdo, which is just a relic of the 60s. You saw those in American films too. But
you had to sort of surrender to its time and place because there is a certain acting style that is peculiar to the 60s and peculiar to Mexican cinema that has, you know, where you have characters constantly sort of looking off into space and delivering their lines.
Very theatrical.
Yes, exactly.
Extremely heightened and melodramatic, which I didn't hate, but yeah, you're right. You have to, as an American audience, and especially a contemporary one, you have to say, look, this was the style of the time. This is the way they're telling the story.
Right. And if you do that, if you can surrender to the pace, which is fairly slow, and you can sort of put yourself in the shoes of an audience member in 1969, then it can get under your skin.
Yeah, 100%. It actually did get under my skin. I mean, again, maybe I'm just an easy audience member, but when the little boy appeared in the mirror behind the wife, I was freaked out, you know, at least momentarily. And I loved, you know, when they show his little feet behind the curtain, things like that, little details. Yeah, I thought it was a really fun, like you said, it's gothic. It's caught up in the idea of terror as opposed to horror. You're not looking at horrific makeup jobs or anything like that. You're actually just being terrorized psychologically, like the wife of the father.
Well, can I ask you guys how you saw this? Because I must confess, I do feel like I am also at a bit of a loss because I watched this on Plex. And at certain moments, the darks were so pixelated that I couldn't quite follow what was happening there. And I kind of tried to look for a better copy of this and was striking out there.
Yeah, I found a copy of it on eBay and got it, and it was actually a lot better. That you could. It was. Yeah, you could see what was going on in the dark places of the screen. This made a difference.
This is a level of prep unforetold on this show. So it's a kudos to you for going to that link.
I would love to see this on the big screen. Yeah, because I saw it on Plex too, and it was, you know, the blacks were breaking up in pixels on my TV.
Right. So I do feel like there's a bit of a missing poetry there that I don't have window to. But that being said, all of that was effective. You mentioned, Sean, The Innocents, and this really feels like a spiritual successor to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The difference being, though, The Innocents does not shy away from holding on its apparitions. In fact, it likes to show you the ghost in the room.
It does, but it still does in a reserved way.
Yes,
You see the ghost like far across the lake, you know, standing there. Right. And you see flash frames, flashes of things. So you never see the thing sort of in total. You get a lot of, they utilize a lot of sound design in The Innocents. Right. So that you have the governess walking around hearing all sorts of whispering voices and things.
Right.
Well, I feel like, I mean, it may not be used to the extent that it's used in The Innocents, but one of the strengths of this film is the sound design and the wind. I love the sound of the wind that we hear throughout a lot of the film. And when they're outside, when they're looking through a window. He even has a film called Hasta el viento tiene miedo, which means even the wind is afraid, which is another one of his biggest horror films. And the way they actually use the music and the sound effects in this film, I think is fantastic. Very evocative, and it's smart filmmaking because sound is cheap and film
sound is
not.
cheap, and sound is also sort of if the image comes through the front door of consciousness, the sound tends to come through the back door.
Yeah.
So it's affecting you on a subconscious level.
Right.
So
much like music.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So those atmospheric effects create all sorts of tension that you can't quite put your finger on.
Exactly.
Like you're not sure what you're afraid of exactly.
I mean, speaking of Lynch, I mean, he was a master of
sound design. Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, I wouldn't say that this is on par with that, but I would just say that I was really impressed with how much they relied on sound and the care that they took with it to help with the scares and the mood.
Yeah, well, even actually, I agree with you there. And I even found myself appreciating that it was a mono mix because it brings all of that front and center. Whereas, today with our Dolby Atmoses and such, it's very easy for things like that to get lost in, the 9.1 speaker setup that you have. And this kind of just brings it all front and center. Yeah,
that's a real typical horror move, which is to take ambient sound and just play it much, much louder than you would in a straightforward movie.
Yeah.
And again, that's also very Gothic. That also evokes Gothic tales.
Because it harkens back to Romanticism and the idea of the sublime and the and nature and the
landscapes.
Sounds of nature. Being a kind of character in the film.
100%. What were you going to say, Colin?
Well, no, actually, so Sean mentioned nature, and I feel like I was kind of picking on this film pace a little bit, and actually, I do want to come back to that when we maybe touch on the editing, because I might not be quite articulating what I mean there. But in terms of the visuals of this film, I would say one of its strong suits is the way that it does kind of interpret nature. Mm-hmm. And this is not really necessarily a ghost tale. It's more of a tale about witchcraft. I mean, certainly the supernatural.
Right.
But it's a tale about witchcraft. And if the film is doing anything on a more symbolic level, the way that it utilizes visuals of nature, in fact, the first time we're even introduced to Silvia, played by Lucy Bouge.
Yes.
There's this, I don't know, like a hedgerow or this line of hedges that's kind of pointing out towards the screen in this sort of converging lines on this tree house. And I just thought that was really interesting. I think that the movie's always kind of trying to sprinkle in little details that way, especially in those scenes outside and scenes surrounding the titular Book of Stone statue. I think the visuals are really interestingly employed in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. There's a sense that the natural imagery evokes sort of the irrational, whereas the images inside the house, when you're inside the house, that's more of a rational space controlled by the masculine. The male characters, and that the female characters seem to be much more in tune with emotion and these irrational forces that the movie evokes.
Right.
But nature certainly, in a symbolic way, embodies that sort of the supernatural and the irrational elements.
Right. Things that we don't fully control.
Exactly.
Or can't control.
Or we can't. That our cognitive categories can't quite pin down. It's a little more than we can get our hands around.
What a great observation, Sean. Yeah, that also even extends to the people who are the servants in the house, right? The wife, the husband and wife. The husband doesn't want to acknowledge what's happening, and the wife is all into it. She's like, no, there's witchcraft going on here. There's black magic. Things are wrong.
and part of the tragedy of the film, in the sense that the people who die near the end can be traced back to the strange sort of emotionless skepticism of the father.
Yes.
Like he refuses to acknowledge what's going on, keeps refusing to.
Let's talk about him. Let's talk about
an interesting character.
Joaquín Cordero. So the way that I voice it like that, because the way that he is voiced throughout the film is in this very heavy-handed ADR where they're like, okay, Joaquín, we need you to do your big man voice. And, instead of just speaking normally, everything he says is, hello, I am Joaquín, and it's very mannered.
Señorita Julia, a usted no puedo ocultarle la verdad. Existe el peligro de que Silvia esté trastornada en sus facultades mentales.
Right.
In a particular, which is probably a staple and a style of that time in Mexico, that sort of thing. It's affected more so than, say, with the character of Carlos by Aldo Monti. Like, just Joaquín Cordero is just like, he's the man's man, and he's in charge, and he's the wealthy aristocrat who lives in the house, and he's going to figure out what's going on, and he's going to fix it.
Right. That sense of masculine control.
Right.
Over the situation, kind of patriarchy. I have everything under control,
right.
And I'm not going to let myself be fooled by this almost feminine irrationality. Like sure, the women and children are seeing these things, but I, as a man, know what's really going on.
Right.
And that's part of the problem, because of course it is really going on.
Right. And to his own debt, I mean, he's the reason why we can speak spoilers here, just so you know, Sean. He's the reason why his daughter ends up a statue at the end.
Right. Exactly.
Even when his daughter's crying for him to stop and to not do it.
Yeah, well, and that dynamic is also represented in the character of Carlos, which, even though he is slightly more effeminate than Eugenio, he's also playing the sort of Occam's razor character where everything that happens, it has to have a natural explanation.
Right.
And certainly I can be there to give a voice to some of those things. So
also the interesting thing is that Carlos is an artist.
Yes.
So he's sort of in between the two, I think. He sort of represents a man who isn't like the man's man, but he's also not completely believing what the women are saying. So he's maybe our entree into well, what really is going on? Is she going insane, or is something weird happening here?
Yeah, he might be sort of dipping in toe into that. But I mean, I do think that dynamic of the masculine sort of impulse to explain this away, I mean, it even extends to the service people, with the gardener played by, is it Bruno? Played by Manuel Donde. Even though he seems to believe, he's kind of reading his wife the riot act about it.
Right.
And at the very least, at that point, you're just assuming it's because they don't want to make any waves. But even he's feeding into that kind of masculine denial.
100%. Yeah. The wife says, he's just afraid. He doesn't want to acknowledge what's going on.
Right.
And all of this is ultimately a kind of, one of the things that I love about the horror genre is that when it's done well, the entity or the supernatural element or the monster is always a projection of the character's inner life, or what they're denying about themselves, or about, in this case, the family, which is this dysfunctional family with all this resentment sort of built into it, like resentment of the daughter towards her stepmother, and so on, and sort of alienation from the father because he is so unemotional and unloving, and all this is the kind of animosity that the daughter has is projected out into the Hugo character.
Yeah, and in fact, the reason why the Mariana character, who is the wife, she's the stepmother of our character Silvia, because she's not the first wife. The first wife died. So we have this Mariana character who's this gorgeous actress, Norma Lazareno, and she actually has a very masculine energy. She is the one woman in the movie who goes on to say, well, this is all nonsense, and I'm not going to let this little girl drive me crazy, and she's going to listen to me whether she likes it or not. She may not love me, but I am the woman of the house, and I'm going to set things right. And that's to her detriment. Again, she's not listening to Silvia, really. She's not listening to what's going on around her.
But she admits of a susceptibility to what Silvia is saying, and she's always reminding us of her potential susceptibility to that.
Well, the thing is, she is the one who experiences a lot of the supernatural stuff that happens. Exactly. So she gets it firsthand.
Yeah, it seems like the characters who repress it the most are the ones who experience it the most.
Right. Down to the father, who at the end will see his daughter petrified.
Exactly.
Yeah, I really liked her. I liked all of the actors except, the Joaquín Cordero character did feel a little stiff, but I guess that's just the mannerism too. And he was playing that character. But I would have liked him to feel a little less robotic and stiff.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly fits his look.
Right.
But, he's got the jutting jaw and the barreled chest and everything. But he's, in a way, it actually serves the film, though, because when we are kind of faced with Silvia's ultimate demise at the end, it's probably a bit more effective that he is actually allowed to emote at that scene and show us a more human side.
Going back to Carlos, he has one of my favorite moments in the whole movie, and it's really small, but I love it. And it's when he's painting the statue.
Oh, right.
And he's by himself, and all of a sudden he looks up and the statue's gone. Mm-hmm. I was like, that is fantastic. Oh, I loved that moment. And then he runs over to see the statue, and I think he runs into Silvia first. What's going on? Is she causing this? I loved that moment, and then eventually, of course, the statue has reappeared there on the other side.
Right. And that's an example of those sort of very minimal elements that can evoke a big reaction from the audience, at least potentially.
Exactly. I mean, that's probably 45 minutes into the movie, if not more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you take it slow enough, and if you just keep feeding the audience little breadcrumbs, when you drop the whole loaf, it's got me, that didn't sound right. When you drop the whole scary moment, it is going to be that much more powerful because you've foreshadowed it, you've built up to it, and now you basically reap what you sow. And it works.
I agree. Just as a strategy for horror films, I much prefer that. I remember when I was early in my screenwriting career, I did rewrites on Halloween Resurrection, and we did a test screening of it. And I remember the movie tried so hard to scare the audience with jump scares, with musical stings, with things jumping out. And I looked around the audience and they all looked bored.
Yeah.
And I knew that, I'd been brought on for rewrites. I did the best I could, but I knew that the strategy was wrong.
Of course.
2 days later, I ended up seeing an early screening of The Others. And in that movie, I watched the entire audience on the edge of their seats, and then a door slammed, and they all screamed in a way that they hadn't screamed at Halloween Resurrection. That had been trying so hard, showing the audience so many things.
This kind of the Hollywood commercial mainstream way of scaring audiences and actually just manipulating audiences has become so tired with, a good example of this is in trailers where they always use like the Japanese toko drums, like everything that happens has a percussive accent that's super loud and overwrought, and it basically just numbs you. So by the end, like what you were saying, the audience is bored because they've just been pummeled into this kind of trance of, well, what am I supposed to react to? Everything is being stressed and shoved in my face.
It's like music where it's nonstop, wall to wall, always loud and always fast. And so there's no way to get a downbeat or a quiet moment.
Yeah, if it's all that, then none of it is that. Right. None of it is special.
Well, and even if you are surprised by every specific jump scare, it can only surprise you once. So the staying power of those techniques isn't very effective. It's not very strong.
No, it's a weak foundation. Weak sauce.
It is pure weak sauce. I mean, we were talking about the marketing for Presence, Soderbergh's latest film, which hasn't been seen by many people, so I won't spoil it. But it's essentially a family drama, and there's virtually nothing scary about it. And yet, if you look at the marketing,
they're trying to market it as a horror film.
It's just egregious, and it's exactly what you're describing there.
No, I mean that's the problem even, in that situation, but also even with films that are supposed to be scary.
Sure.
They're showing you too much and then they're emphasizing everything. So nothing becomes special.
Right. And that comes with fear, which is in order to scare the audience the way we're describing, you risk possibly boring them. You risk possibly them just sort of tuning out.
You have to have faith.
Right. You have to have the kind of performances and the kind of filmmaking that keeps the audience engaged even in the quiet moments.
Absolutely.
And that's difficult. You need to be a masterful filmmaker to pull that off.
I found myself engaged throughout this film. I mean, I did, yes, it had tropes that we'd seen before, and yes, it was slow or whatever, but I think I was just so charmed by it. And the acting, even though it was a bit overwrought at times, I cared about the characters. I wanted to see what was going to happen. I wanted to see how the director was going to take this tale. Was it going to be that the girl was doing all of this? Because up until quite late in the movie, I was thinking that, maybe it's her. Maybe she's just an evil little kid and she's doing things.
Yeah, I think these characters are so well rendered and so distinct that this film does give you a window into them that makes you at least root for them in a sense. And I do want to clarify how I'm feeling about the pacing, because I think that the pacing of the storytelling absolutely works for me. I'm literally talking about moments in the film that could just stand to be trimmed down a little bit. So a family will get up from dinner and wander into the garden, and we will watch that shot play out for maybe 10 seconds longer than I think we should. And I say I think we should because I don't think it's necessarily serving the story at that point. You know, we watch Mariana, they go to town. She pulls the car around to get back onto the road. We watch that car make that full U-turn, and those moments are not really adding anything for me.
Is it adding? Is it affecting the pace or the kind of mood?
I just feel like that pace would have persisted without some of those moments. So that's what drags for me. But the actual pace of storytelling, their decision to make this a slow burn, that works for me.
That works for you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that it's true of modern or contemporary editing that things are cut much tighter, and that those elements that the audience all they need to see is the first part of a U-turn to understand, understand the rest of it.
Right.
So I think that's another sort of artifact of it being an older film.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a technique that might not have been firmly developed at that point, or at least entrenched. Can we talk about this Gila monster?
Let's talk.
Yeah, very Freudian Gila monster, as it's it dies and is resurrected on the bed of the maid. It's an interesting symbol in the film. Again, it speaks to the animal and the irrational.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have a sense of what Hugo's powers or abilities are? This film kind of gives us this sort of an exposition dump right in the middle of the film.
Which I liked. I
do too.
I felt like it came at a great time and it wasn't boring.
No, I do too. They did it in a way where if another film had tried it the same way, it probably would not have been as successful. But because this is all kind of secondhand, I mean, Julia and Silvia are essentially playing a game of telephone with the family. So I feel like that works. That being said, his background and his abilities kind of come at you hard and fast. So did you have a sense of exactly what Hugo was? I mean, or whether he's supposed to be a representative or something? Is he a spirit?
They describe it. I mean, as I understood it, and this is how, if I'm remembering correctly, I think they start talking about a witch, which I think is a male witch that they're speaking of, who lived about 800 years earlier and had a child, and the witch was going to die, and so left literally a book of spells and powers with the child, and in order to preserve them, petrified them, so made them into stone. And then when the witch was scheduled to come back to life 1,000 years later, then the book would be there for the witch. And so Hugo is literally the guardian of this kind of book of dark black magic.
I see. And I recall something in there about he's supposed to spring back to life when he finally sees his father again. That makes sense. Yes. Okay. But Hugo is not an apparition. Did you get the sense that it was, and maybe I'm just thinking about this way too literally.
No.
But did you get the sense that the statue was springing to life? I mean, it does disappear at one point.
I think it's suggested that something happens where, yes, because as we were talking about earlier, Carlos sees that the statue is gone. So the statue does move. And, we do see behind Mariana, we see the pale face of the boy in the mirror, smiling.
Right.
So it seems to be some kind of, animated spirit that can go back to being petrified and then can leave, its place and walk around the grounds and hang out with Silvia. So I would say yes.
But then Silvia is occasionally talking to Hugo and seeing Hugo when nobody else is.
True. And also remember that she's also talking to him when he is there, because one camera move that I do think is too slow is when I think it's Julia comes into the room to put Silvia to bed, and she's like, "I heard you talking. Why wouldn't who were you talking to?" "Nobody." "Oh, okay, I was talking to Hugo." Kisses her goodnight, leaves the room, and then there's a very, very slow camera move over to the drapes, and then you see the feet of Hugo. So I think it's both. I think sometimes Hugo is there in some kind of physical embodiment, and sometimes he's unseen.
And it's interesting from a screenwriter's perspective to ask yourself how much exposition and how much explanation of the rules and the mythology is going to serve the movie.
Right.
Because the risk is always, if you don't articulate the rules clearly, then the audience can start to get confused. Well, is it an apparition or is it the coming to life? But if you articulate things too clearly, it can become too familiar and become too...
It loses the mystery.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, this is something that I think is probably something that you've dealt with a lot with notes. Right. You know, where they're probably asking you, well, should we know more about the mythology here? You know, what about the mythology? And you're
yeah,
like, you know,
I've been there. The first script that I wrote in film school that eventually sold was a movie called The Dorm. And it went through 16 years of rewrites, of being in a constant cycle of a different group of executives would decide that they wanted to get it made, and I'd get a certain pile of notes, and the film would go in one direction. And then years would pass, and a different group of executives would come around, and we go in another direction. It was a movie, then it was going to be a TV show, then it was going to be a 4-episode miniseries, and then it was going to be 2 TV movies. And the ultimate result is that it was overthought. There, and especially the notes that we kept getting as we went into production were so, let's pin this down exactly what it is, that it ultimately
they kill it.
Yeah, exactly. And horror is one of those genres like comedy where it's difficult sometimes to argue for why one thing is scary and one thing is not.
Sure, right.
And why. If we focus on jump scares, that's going to cheapen it, and it's actually going to take away from the movie overall.
Right.
There's the fear of, no, we've got to scare the audience, quickly put something in there before the commercial break.
It's sort of like, not to be pretentious, but the line drawings by Picasso. You draw enough to evoke whatever it is, the whole. If you draw too much, then you're taking away mystery. You're taking away. So, you know, it's something that Lynch dealt with a lot in his career of just constantly trying to not over-explain his films. You know, they'd ask him, well, why this, why that? And it's up to you. You know, and that's the point, is like, I left certain things out, or I explained certain things ambiguously so that you would fill it in. That's what you were talking about earlier, is like, how much mythology do you want me to give you? Because if I give you too much, it's going to take away your pleasure as a viewing, as an audience member.
And I think this film did a good job of making us really curious about what some of the backstory was, so that by the time that we got there, we were ready for a little bit of an exposition dump.
Absolutely. 100%.
But in general, I like it when movies give you the minimum effective dose. You know, they just give you just enough to activate your imagination, so that, again, you're putting it together in your own mind.
Same.
Right. And if you give an audience too much exposition or too much background, maybe you provide them with really like a formula that they're prone to cleave to, you know, while they're watching the film. I mean, you know, oh, well, you said that Freddy was a physical manifestation. How can he appear in one room and the other one? You know, so it's like if you give too many pieces of information, they can hone to that material a little bit too closely, and that can become problematic.
Whereas if you do a line sketch, then people can, to their own personal taste, fill in the blanks, because that's going to be special to them, because it's them, it's theirs.
And of course, those expressionistic sketches also lend themselves to repeat viewing much better than the alternative. I mean, you can continually, as you say, fill in those blanks with different meanings as you progress, or as you watch the thing again, or as your life changes, you bring your own experiences to that.
You talked about Halloween earlier, and of course the original was masterful in the way that it only sketched a certain amount. You really didn't know that much. You knew, okay, Michael Myers is a guy who, he was a sick kid, he killed his sister, he was put in a mental institution, and that this doctor, Dr. Loomis, wants to keep him from ever getting out because he saw pure evil in that boy.
Right.
And that's about it. And so, you know, I like Carpenter's proclivity of, you know, I only want to know so much, and then I want there to be ambiguity, and I want there to be opportunity for the audience to imagine the possibilities.
Exactly. You know, I remember when I was working on Conan the Barbarian, I was talking to Marcus Nispel about horror with regard to another movie that I'd done a rewrite on that he was attached to. And we were talking about Alien. And one of his criticisms of Alien was that there wasn't enough exposition, that he wanted to know more, have more explained. And I felt the exact opposite.
Yeah.
I felt like that movie in particular is masterful at giving you just enough information to make the thing, the monster, completely uncanny.
Yeah.
Exactly. And not only that, I mean, you're speaking to a whole thing that has happened with the Alien series, which is this idea of let's go back and explain the space jockey.
Right.
Let's explain what happened. Let's create this whole civilization of engineers that may have created. It's like, oh my goodness, no. I liked the idea that you had this sort of skeletal figure in this petrified chair in that giant
and
set
you're
piece
like,
in Alien.
what is that?
What is that? Did that person get attacked by an alien? Is this after or before that? Or, is there something underneath? Yes, your imagination can go wild with the possibilities from the H.R. Giger designs.
Right. I mean, at the time, people were even viewing Alien as a metaphor for AIDS, I mean, it's come to take on that. And you can't do that if you give every single little detail. And this thing was genetically created in a lab by so-and-so. It just doesn't work.
It becomes a different kind of filmmaking. Like the Aliens, the second one was really an action film with monsters.
Sure. Yes,
because it no longer sort of traded on that inscrutability that the original Alien had. I mean, in the original Alien, the creature itself only is on screen for maybe 45 seconds total.
Right.
You only see it in fragments and flashes.
Yes.
So that you as an audience are provoked to try to imagine what the whole thing looks like.
Yeah, to have nightmares about it.
Right, exactly.
And even in Alien, I mean, I would say I think Aliens, the sequel, is masterful. Those two films are, I think, both brilliant.
Right, but they're different kinds of movies.
They're different kinds of movies. And also, I would say that Cameron only goes so far to explain any more of the mythology. He doesn't spend a lot of time on that. What he spends time on is developing the characters and their reactions to the alien, because that's what it's about anyway. That's why people always get this wrong when, often with sequels or prequels, they focus on the thing when it isn't about that. It is about all the people around it and how they treat each other and how they're reacting to the situation.
Yeah, that's key in horror, is the reaction of the characters. If you believe their reaction, if you believe that they're frightened, you will be frightened.
I don't care if the zombies are fast or slow. How are these people surviving? That's what I want to see.
Sure.
That's what I love about Romero's films. I don't care if the zombie's this way or that way, or give me a break. So anyway. Sorry.
Well, and returning to this film, I mean, that's what is so effective. I mean, these characters are pretty well rendered, and it all really comes back to Marga Lopéz for me, or Julia. I guess. Honestly, she's got kind of she's giving really an interesting performance, because she's got a bit of a subtlety to her, and she has this background. And for me, it was a bit of another one of those recognizable tropes is the child. She's bringing her own personal grief to this situation. Yet,
which isn't slathered on sloppily the way it is so much in horror films. Like, you don't even find out until like a half hour or more into the movie.
That's where I'm going with this. I mean, she's carrying that burden, and you can tell that it's there, but it's very, very subtle, and that's really effective. She's able to walk that tightrope fairly successfully.
Whereas in a contemporary Hollywood horror film, you would be hit over the head so hard with that, so that you knew how miserable she is inside.
There'd be a flashback of a car accident, and you would see viscera flying out the windows. And
and
you would see
in
it
the hospital.
Yeah, you would see it intercut throughout, and it was there. It was in the background, but I think it speaks to her performance. I mean, she carries it pretty well, and you buy her as this kind of patient and measured governess, and she brings a kind of a stability that's definitely been lacking.
Yeah, and she is the proxy mother, because Mariana is too she's too wound up. She's affected by what Silvia is doing too much, and Julia is able to keep a level, like you said, a measured, level head, and be a mother to her, which is what she needs.
Right. She's definitely a surrogate mother. And that goes to the symbolism of the film, again, in the sense that if it's about a dysfunctional family and about the sort of resentments in this dysfunctional family being repressed, then she's like this breath of fresh air that comes into the family situation. And she can relate to the the little girl, whereas the stepmother can't.
Exactly. I mean, let's go back to what you were saying, Sean, which I think is so smart and key to the film is, this is about the family and a family that is having problems. And so this horror that takes place around it is just metaphorical for that.
Right.
And the daughter she doesn't have a close relationship with her father. You can tell. He's this aristocratic businessman. He's probably often gone. He's trying to get his girl to go back to school. I think what does she have? Multiple sclerosis or she has some kind of illness that she's dealing with. And they're trying to get her strong enough and mentally prepared enough to go back to school with other girls and things like that. And so that's why they get this governess to come in and teach her. And the other governess that they had before had left, and they don't want to tell the new governess about it.
Right.
But it seems like there is some kind of distance between Silvia and Mariana, the stepmother, and even Silvia and her father. And that kind of grows into this rotting, horror that begins to surround them with Hugo and is converted into, like you said earlier, the females seem to be in touch with what's going on supernaturally. And even if it doesn't make a logical sense,
right,
it is happening. And the men don't want to pay attention, especially the father. And they're going to dominate this into whatever direction they want to go and fix things. And of course, that just leads to tragedy. So does that make sense as far as what the film seems to be talking about?
I mean, part of it, I wonder how much it was intended by the filmmaker himself.
Yeah.
Because part of it is just cultural, that
Yes.
sort of patriarchy, and that sort of strong male father figure.
Right.
But regardless, the film does seem to evoke what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think there is at least a consciousness on the part of the writer-director, he wrote and directed it, Carlos Taboada, that he is looking at a family that is wealthy and seeing a kind of distance between the parents and the children. And I don't know if he grew up with any of that. I know that he came from an artistic family. His parents were both actors, and then they raised him in an artistic environment. But I think maybe it feels like he's observed this in other families that he's been around, where the father is largely absent and distant.
I mean, if this film is grasping for deeper meaning, perhaps it is embodied in this idea that it is a film that is or it is a family, rather, that's unwilling to directly confront this issue that's right in front of them.
And work together to do so.
Right.
They don't work together.
I read that as being intentional. I don't know if I necessarily think the film was trying to say something about gender dynamics and their susceptibility to nature or to supernatural forces or any of that. I hope it was.
It's definitely there either way. I agree. I think it's definitely there, but who knows if it's
even
conscious.
if it's just a convenient byproduct, though. I mean, I think that there's still worth in that. I think it's very interesting. There's this very interesting visual of Silvia while she's literally doing like a pentagram upstairs. And,
that was interesting. The star that she makes, and she's trying to resurrect her. What did you guys call it? A Gila monster?
Yeah.
I'm actually not sure what that thing is, but
the giant lizard that is in the movie that keeps coming back. You earlier said that it was Freudian. What aspect?
I
of
only
it?
said that because it felt like a sort of an id sort of creature.
Yeah.
As opposed to something more rational and egoic. And also the fact that it dies and is resurrected and is lying there, stretched out on the maid's bed.
Okay.
And so just it feels like a sexual symbol. Like there's some very sort of faint sort of sexuality in the film, in the sense that like the way the stepmother's dressed, she's always the most sexualized.
For sure.
So there are those elements that are sort of bubbling under the surface.
Got
right.
it.
Or at the very least, if you're to do some kind of dream analysis, like this might represent something. And actually I'm looking at a visual of this creature now, and it also could just be the simple fact that it seems to have kind of like a skeletal or like a skull-like pattern on its back. I mean, I'm looking at literally at the poster, and it's front and center on the poster for the film. But it's interesting that they choose to employ it in very strategic places. I mean, the first place we see it is actually in this very interesting scene that takes place in that church.
Right, on top of the church roof.
Right.
Which I thought was that's hilarious when Marga Lopéz gets up there and she doesn't take off her high heels. She's like, "No, I'm going to climb on this thing in my high."
She's a high heel warrior. She crosses that downed log that's like that goes across their moat or whatever, their lake or whatever, to get to the statue. She knows how to rock those things.
mean, talk about committing to the high heels.
Yeah.
Holy smokes! I was like scared for her just being up there, and then she's doing it in heels.
No, that was a really interesting sequence to me, and like I feel like it kind of encapsulates some of the film's clunkiness, but it
is slow, that moment. I agree with that.
But it's also really visually arresting, her kind of slowly making her way up those stairs and whatever it is, that lizard being in the foreground.
Right.
And the dynamic between Hugo and Silvia is kind of like fleshed out in that sequence better than it is anywhere hitherto. And
I'm curious as to what Hugo and Silvia were doing so that Silvia got up there. Was Hugo trying to put Silvia in danger? What was happening? I'm still not sure.
I felt like, and I'm not sure if I'm projecting onto the film or not, that Hugo ultimately wanted her to be part of his world. So maybe he was urging her to jump. And she was refusing. That was how I was reading it, but I'm not sure if I was.
There is a part where she says, when the governess is approaching her, she says, "No, I won't do it," or something like that.
That's how I interpreted that moment.
I thought the way I interpreted that was that Hugo was telling her to push her off.
Right. That's. I thought of that as well.
Yeah, I wonder. And there's some ambiguity. We don't know. It's not explained.
Right. Right.
There would have been, 5 minutes of dialogue after in an American film, like, well,
sure.
what he was saying was.
And that's for screenwriters, that's another choice you have to make, because if you're too ambiguous, the audience gets confused.
Right.
You want them to feel engaged by a kind of artful ambiguity where you're really intrigued by it.
Right.
And so you're provoked to fill in all the gaps.
Right.
But if you're too ambiguous, then it just feels like I don't understand what's going on.
Right.
So you have to find that balance.
Going to what you were talking about with the id, how's this for a stretch? What if Hugo is Silvia's id?
He's certainly part of her subconscious. In other words, she was upset by the dog because the dog barked at her,
right.
and the dog turns up dead.
Exactly.
She is resentful of her stepmother, and she ends up drowned.
And she is with Julia when she drops her brooch into the pond.
Right.
And then Hugo brings it back to her.
Right.
So it's kind of like Hugo is an extension of whatever Silvia wants.
That's exactly right. And that's very typical of horror films. I sometimes show in my class, as an example of a horror film, I show The Babadook, not because it's a perfect film, but because it has so many examples that I can pull.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I like that film.
But what it does also is that The Babadook becomes so clearly the representation of the mother's repressed, resentment
Rage.
towards her son. Yeah,
depression.
Yeah, exactly. And that so I think in really good horror films, it's always the case that you can trace the actions of the supernatural entity back to the repressed intentions of one or more of the characters.
Right.
A buddy and I were having a thought experiment where we were thinking, okay, because eventually, they're going to turn every successful horror film into a franchise.
Right.
And we thought maybe they could do that artfully with the Babadook. And, in the future iterations, it'll just represent different kinds of trauma. So, in the sequel, he'll represent PTSD. And then in the third sequel, he'll represent anxiety attacks. Or
you know what they're
like
going to call? You know what they're going to call the second Babadook? Babadoo.
Yeah. Okay. Oof. Wow.
So, did you guys have any feelings about any of the other actors, like Norma Lazareno, who did Mariana, or Aldo Monti, who did Carlos? I know we talked about it a little bit. Was there anything else you wanted to mention about them or their performance or their characters?
Well, I feel like Norma Lazareno, Mariana, is doing a really good job of giving you kind of grounded perspective as to exactly why she might be going through what she's going through. I mean, she's not broadly painted as the evil stepmother,
right.
Which this film starts to veer towards that territory, but it doesn't ever quite go there, which I appreciate.
No. And I think it's going back to what Sean was saying, it's doing that thing of, she's kind of going with the male energy of, I'm going to control this situation, but these forces are uncontrollable and they're going to undo her.
They do choose to employ an interesting technique or strategy with her character where they have kind of like a voodoo doll situation going on.
Right, with the doll.
And it allows her to, well, I mean, it certainly gives us a reason to understand why she's, literally seizing up in the middle of a car ride.
Right.
That was kind of a cul-de-sac of this film that I didn't quite need. Although I guess maybe you could see that as representative of Silvia's kind of poking and prodding into Mariana's. Silvia's essentially trying to wear Mariana down, or Hugo is at the very least. And so maybe you could see that as visually representative of that. Mm-hmm. I didn't quite need it.
Yeah.
Well, certainly, I think Silvia doesn't like her stepmother, and so Hugo is an amplification of that resentment.
Yeah.
And Carlos, I actually wish the father had been like Carlos. Like, I wonder if maybe they could have gotten rid of the Carlos character and just made, the Eugenio character more like him. But then I guess he couldn't have had Carlos die in the fiery car crash that happens.
Right. I felt like he was going to die from the moment he appeared on
Yeah,
screen.
He's so likable. You're like, oh, this guy's a goner.
Exactly.
Forget it.
Well, I think I think we like him in contrast to the father.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I think the father as this unemotional, sort of repressed, dominating figure is important for the movie.
Right.
I agree that the performance of it got a little stilted.
Right.
But I think as a character that was the right choice.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it totally, and maybe feel free to disagree, guys, but another way that this could have gone would have been that Eugenio would have died and Carlos would have lived. And so that would have been another way of showing the problems of, acting the way that the father is acting toward the daughter's illness versus the way that Carlos was more flexible and open-minded. There's a lack of rigidity in Carlos that we like, I think.
That's true. Well, it depends on what kind of ending you ultimately want.
Right.
If it had gone that direction, you could have had an ending where that's more happy or that's more resolved, where the daughter survives.
Right.
But if it's going to be a tragedy, tragedies are often cases where a character does not realize their need as opposed to their want in time. In other words, the father doesn't accept the supernatural and accept what's happening to his family in time for it to end well. Right. And so he has to be a flawed character.
Right. He has to stick around to suffer and to make it a tragedy.
Exactly.
What do you take from this ending? So he smashes the statue of Hugo.
Yeah.
And Silvia ends up taking its place.
Right.
Is that representative of anything deeper other than black magic has put an exclamation point on this mystery?
On the surface, I mean, I think that obviously it could be the witch's revenge on him destroying his son.
Sure.
It could also be the fail safe for the book to be preserved. So somebody has to guard the book. So okay, if it's not going to be him, it's going to be this girl. But also going back to what Sean was saying and the rigidity of the Eugenio Rubalcaba character. I find it interesting that we're using the word rigidity because the daughter becomes petrified into stone.
Interesting.
And so is that symbolic of, if you beat all of the nature out of your kids, all of the intuition, all of the things that come naturally, are you just going to turn them into something that is going to be twisted inside and rigid on the outside?
Yeah, that's what I'm driving at. I'm wondering if it's making that point or if that's just something we're bringing to it.
I think it's absolutely a viable explanation.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's supported by the movie. Yeah. There's definitely a sense that the father, by smashing up the statue, is making the wrong choice.
Yes.
That, again, he's, instead of taking the attitude of the governess, which is more embracing of the supernatural and trying to work with it,
right.
He's directly opposing it, again, with a real male energy,
right.
Taking violence to the statue. I'm going to control this by smashing it to pieces.
Deny it until I have to smash it, and then I'll just destroy it.
Yeah. But in most supernatural movies, denial is always the wrong move.
Right. Boy, does he get it in the end.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's certainly effective. I mean, I prefer the ending up that way instead of Eugenio becomes the statue and Carlos and Julia become Silvia's surrogate step parents or whatever it is.
Right.
It's definitely more effective this way.
Let's talk a little bit about the director. And if you guys have any comments on the directing, please feel free to fill in here. I'm just going to say a little bit about him because he was one of the more important Mexican directors that has existed. Born July 18th, 1929, died April 15th, 1997. His name was Carlos Enrique Taboada Walker. So Walker is the name of his mother. She was Irish. His father was Taboada. He was Spanish. And he was born in Mexico. As I talked about before, his parents were actors. He was raised in an artistic household, grew up, I think, in Mexican society, and also won 2 Ariel Awards, which is their Academy Awards. And he actually made a number of films that were successful, including some horror films. He also did dramas and other things. I like his writing and his directing very much. To Sean's point earlier, there's a kind of light hand in terms of, telling a tale of terror and building up to scares as opposed to hitting you over the head with it. It sticks with you longer.
I also felt just, even as I first started watching the movie, I always feel like in the first 5 minutes of a film, I can tell if I'm in good hands or not. Mm-hmm. And I felt that he was a director who knew how to move the camera and knew how to block characters and knew how to reveal things as opposed to just show them bluntly.
Right.
With a camera move, with a pan, with a tilt up. He was using the camera in a sophisticated way.
And when he's using effects, they are simple effects, but they're effective.
Right.
The reflections, the pieces of seeing the boy's feet, little things
the shadow
build.
up on the wall.
The shadows.
Yeah,
yes.
it works out. And again, it's part of the limitation of low budget filmmaking. He didn't have access to bigger special effects, but he thought very clearly about, okay, using minimal effects, how can I show just a fragment of something that will, again, provoke the audience to imagine more?
Suggestive as opposed to just demonstrative.
Right.
Here it is. Here's the monster.
Yeah, well, his scripts certainly have staying power. I mean, a lot of the films that he's well known for have been remade over the years.
Yep,
and,
including this one.
Yeah, including this one. So
this film was shot from August 5th, 1968 to September 30th, 1968. Released in July of 1969. It was well received by both audiences and critics. He worked with producer Adolfo Grovas, who I think I've also seen credited as executive producer, which might mean that he provided some of the financing himself, if not all of it. Mexico didn't have a huge film industry, but it did have one then, and they were making all kinds of films. Some of the other films by the producer are El Medallón del Crimen, El Monstruo de los Volcanes, which I like. That's translated to The Monster of the Volcanoes, and La Muñeca Perversa, The Perverse Doll. So this guy was into making horror films, and he had a ready participant in Taboada.
I would definitely watch more of his films.
Yeah.
Just because I'm always interested in filmmakers who try to use the weird and the eerie to grab the audience's attention and then creep them out in using minimal means.
So some of Taboada's other horror films, Poison for the Fairies, which is Veneno para las Hadas, that's 1984. He had another one called Más Negro que la Noche, Darker Than Night, and that's 1975. So those are some other ones that people can check out if they're interested in him.
Another thing that I liked about his directing style was and writing style is all the characters had a certain amount of dignity about them. None of the characters felt like they were just functional for the horror.
Right.
They all seemed to have inner lives and backstories, and they had presence on screen. But the way he approached probably directing the actors allowed them to have very authentic reactions to the situations that they found themselves in.
Right. As Colin pointed out earlier, even the stepmother isn't a wicked stepmother. She's just...
Exactly.
She's out of sorts, but, she's trying. She's trying to be a good mother.
Right. No, you can feel for all the characters, even if they're complex to some degree.
No, but I take your point there, Sean. I mean, it does feel like it feels like they were all given that, which is now a common exercise of having to even almost generate their own backstory for these characters, because you can feel like they are carrying that with them. And it's really effective.
Were there any other elements of the film that you guys wanted to discuss?
I feel like there was a score that was doing some interesting lifting here from time to time, but again, maybe it was the mix or my Plex experience. Now it did stand out when it was used effectively, and it was used effectively from time to time. But there were times where it almost kind of blended in with the sound effects stems or mix. So it was interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was an evocative and moody score. It's by Raul Lavista, and I really liked it. I liked it very right at the beginning with the credits. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the sound on the Plex copy that I saw, which looks like maybe it's a VHS rip.
Maybe.
I mean, it's pretty low quality. It might have not have been such a good representation of what they did.
Right. The DVD that I saw, it was a little better than that.
Okay, good.
I could hear the music, but I did feel that at certain key moments, the music and the sound design sort of intermeshed a little, so that you couldn't tell the difference from one to the other. And I feel like that's a strategy employed in really good horror films, where sound design starts to become musical and the music becomes almost like sound design.
Yeah.
Going back to the sound design, I just want to give credit to some of these guys who did the work back in the day, and I think did a great job. George T. Fallon was the sound supervisor, sound editor Sigfrido Garcia, and the dialogue recordist was Javier Mateos, and re-recording mixer Salvador Topete. These guys, I think, contributed a lot to the overall feel and tone of the film, and helped make it moody and effective.
Well, and as you say, that opening score kind of really does tee us off pretty well.
And it had an originality to it that I appreciated.
Yeah.
The editing is by Carlos Savage. I thought it was pretty good. I thought he did a good job.
Yeah, I do think that there are some of those moments that, and I think Sean approximates it well. It's maybe there are some techniques that weren't fully developed
and it's also of its time,
right?
In the slow pace.
But I think in terms of making an hour 50 film not feel like an hour 50 film was pretty effective. He acquits himself well there. So.
Yeah. When I look at editing, I always ask myself, are the shots holding tension from beginning to end? And there were a lot of long takes.
Yeah.
So for the most part, the scenes themselves held tension.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. There are a few moments where it's like, oh, you might have cut some of this out, but yeah. Any other elements, guys?
No, I mean, I guess it was interesting that this feels like a movie that would ordinarily have been shot in black and white. So the use of color was interesting here.
Yeah.
I think they particularly hone in on an interesting shade of green. In fact, that opening card utilizes it pretty interestingly. But I think that serves the kind of themes of nature that we were discussing earlier.
Maybe it's pointing to nature.
And it is pointing to nature because green is used a lot. And for a horror film, there's not a lot of red.
Right.
That's a good point.
Even when Carlos's car kind of like capsizes, there's like a green explosion or smoke behind it.
That is a weird explosion, but I didn't know if that was my Plex copy or because you could hardly see anything, and then you just like see these flames shooting out of a thing.
Yeah, I saw it a little bit more clearly, but it was green. It was not orange flames.
Yeah. Interesting.
They're clearly utilizing the color palette in an interesting way. It'd be fun to go back through this and look at it through that perspective.
Right. I definitely learned that we need to not meddle with forces we don't understand.
That's absolutely true.
Yes.
And if you're a parent, you need to get over yourself and listen to your children.
That's right.
Or they will turn to stone.
Or they will turn to stone. Well, I would like to actually now segue into talking about some films that you might have seen recently, whether old or new, that you would recommend to audiences.
Well, the first one that I wanted to recommend, having seen this movie, if you haven't seen The Innocents, it's a great film to see for its performances, for the cinematography, but also for its very subtle use of sound and image to do exactly what we've been talking about this entire episode, which is provoke a feeling of dread in the audience by showing them just the minimal amount, revealing just the minimal amount. There's a moment when the governess is walking through this windy old mansion at night where there's just a tapping sound that turns out to just be just a little weight on the end of a string just tapping against a window. But it is really creepy and evocative.
That's great.
But so it's really minimal, but it's extremely effective. The other movies that I'll throw out there, since we've been talking about movies that are able to do a lot with a little, I want to pitch this movie. I don't know if you've seen it, Quatermass in the Pit.
Yeah. I saw the Quatermass Experiment. I haven't seen Quatermass in the Pit.
Quatermass in the Pit. All the Quatermass movies are interesting for this reason. But Quatermass in the Pit it has very, very low budget special effects, but the reactions of the characters and the context of particular moments evokes all sorts of dread and eeriness in the audience, and I think it does a lot more than it has any business doing.
Right.
So it's worth seeing.
I love that. And do you have a third one?
Well, sure.
It doesn't have to be horror. It could be anything.
Well, I'll make a pitch for A Separation, which I show in my class.
Oh yeah, Farhadi.
Because Farhadi is a great filmmaker, and he also did The Salesman, which is another good movie.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's seen enough. Like I show it to a class of 120 students, and none of them have ever heard of him. And so I feel like I'd like to see him seen more.
I had the good fortune of meeting him at the Egyptian several years ago.
Oh, that's excellent.
Very nice man. Do you have any projects coming out that you want to talk about? Or
Sure. I have a project that is two things. It's going to be a comic book that I wrote that's coming out called The Resurrectionists, which is a story told in the world of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Oh, wow.
But it's seen from the point of view of Elizabeth Frankenstein and another character named Ingrid. Victor Frankenstein has gone crazy. He's been put in an asylum, and we watch two women take over his practice, essentially, and start resurrecting children.
Oh, wow.
Child death was very prevalent at that particular time. And so there were a lot of corpses from the put together. And so the stories about that kind of dealing with grief and bringing children back to life. So it's going to be a comic book that'll come out later in the year, and then we're pitching it as a animated series. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. How can people find out more about you, like through social media, et cetera?
They can go to my blog, undergrids.com.
Okay.
They can follow me. I think I'm on Twitter. My social media presence is lessened over the years.
Right.
That's wise.
Yeah, exactly.
But they could certainly read about me, but just by Googling me.
Absolutely. Well, this episode is sound engineered, edited, and mixed by Colin Dixon. It was produced by William Boudel and Colin Dixon. Original music composed by Michael Riola, recorded at Boo's Hollywood Dell in beautiful Hollywood, California. If you'd like to contact us with comments, suggestions, or high praise, please email us at cosmicmotionshow@gmail.com or send us a voice message at speakpipe.com/cosmicmotion. You can find us on the socials at Cosmic Motion or Cosmic Motion Show. Emails, messages, audio, or other media you send us may be featured on the program. We want to thank our guest, Sean Hood.
Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks to my frighteningly fabulous co-host, Colin.
Take a sledgehammer to the rest of your day, folks.
Thank you, listener, for joining us for this episode. We look forward to exploring the cinematic cosmos with you in the future. Until then, keep learning, growing, and creating.
Here's what some people are saying about the Projection Booth podcast.
This podcast takes no shortcut in producing outstanding content. How they haven't become more widely recognized is beyond me.
I love this show. Smart commentary, in-depth interviews, and great production.
It's obvious how serious these guys take their podcast and bring that next level of professionalism that anyone would be hard-pressed to match.
The Projection Booth podcast, with new episodes available every week at projectionboothpodcast.com.